again. We're continuing our study of the theme, Sanctification by Faith Alone. We have a request this evening. Can you give a brief definition of faith in the context of sanctification by faith alone? Perhaps this wasn't clear the first night that we started this series, which we tried to give a clear definition of faith. And so we'll try it briefly again this evening. By faith, we're talking about something more than intellectual assent. We are not talking about simply knowledge. The devils have that, and they are trembling because of it. We are talking about a vital relationship with Jesus, which has at its base a personal, ongoing, daily communion. And that this is the source of any genuine faith. We are not talking about saying, I believe. We're talking about an actual relationship, one-to-one with God. And it is understood in this way because of what faith is. Faith is trust. You have to know someone to trust them. Getting to know Jesus, getting to know God, results in trust. So faith in this context is a relationship that results in trust. And the big thing that divides between genuine faith and pseudo-faith or false faith is the meaningful, ongoing devotional life. We can continue to emphasize that in spite of its hazards, because it is the big divider between the true and the false kind of faith. And notice we say meaningful devotional life. Talking about something more than just going through the motion. Now, someone else passed in a note last week after our meeting. After we talked about axioms and postulates. Must have been a math major. You recall we took the position concerning the spirit of prophecy quotations that appear to sound like working hard at it, that the postulate in the setting of sanctification by faith alone is that our effort and our energy and our choice and our backbone all are directed toward the relationship of faith. And when we read something that says you have not yet resisted unto blood, for instance, in Scripture, striving against sin, we ask the two questions, how and toward what? Well, someone said that's one postulate. Now you should take the opposite postulate, or the other postulate, which is have a relationship with God, plus put forth the effort to deliberately work hard in addition to it. We should test that out too. Well, this is the basis for this note. Don't spend too much time checking out the other postulate. As a church, we've worked on that one for more than 100 years, and we're still here. I thought that was a good note. Now, the point is not that we shouldn't check it out theoretically, but theory is nothing in comparison with experience. And most of us are very familiar with the do the best you can and let God help you do what you can't do approach, aren't we? We're very familiar with that. That's the diet we've been on for over 100 years. Now, we want to get into the will tonight. I've been trying to write a book for over 100 years. It always ends up in the bottom drawer on the left-hand side. Yeah, the title of the book is Righteousness by Faith and Your Will. And I have the preface done. I thought I'd read the preface. Maybe it'll set the background for our talk tonight. In my years of ministry, I've encountered one particular question again and again. How do I use my will and my willpower in living the Christian life? Where does my human effort end, and where does God's divine power begin? And vice versa. Some of us have been studying this question for years, only to discover that it is frustrating, yet rewarding. We have even at times been tempted to scrap the whole study, but we've always been drawn back to it because of its unresolved questions. The subject of the will contains a strange paradox. It is simple, and yet for many it is difficult. In the days of Christ, the good people rejected it, but sinners welcomed its understanding with joy. Spiritual death awaits those who misunderstand the subject. Those who understand it find the secret of victorious Christian living. While philosophers, theologians, and psychologists through the centuries have discussed, debated, and theorized about man's nature and free will versus determinism, little emphasis had been placed on the operation of the post-conversion will. Probably this is because of the two doctrines of predestination and cheap grace, for neither belief attaches any importance to the human will. Luther and Erasmus in the 16th century dialogued on the freedom or enslavement of the will, but their dialogue was primarily concerning the pre-conversion will. As far as our denomination is concerned, very little has been written on this subject, and our church apparently has no consensus on it. Some of us have tried to study the will in the writings of Ellen White, only to be frustrated by apparent paradoxes or contradictions. One paragraph tells us that we can do nothing to save ourselves or to become sanctified except to keep coming to Christ just as we are. And another paragraph admonishes us to put forth strenuous effort, exerting every ounce of energy and self-discipline, instead of sitting around waiting for God to do our part for us. And we've debated among ourselves. Does God only expect us to rely totally upon Him in a personal relationship? Or does He want us to put forth strenuous effort in addition to this relationship? For the past few years, some of us have been studying this topic every week, looking forward to the day when we would feel confident enough to present a series on it. This book is especially dedicated to those who have been born again into Christ, those who are experiencing the joys and struggles of living the Christian life, those who are becoming discouraged and ready to give up religion entirely because of continual defeat and failure in daily living. It is our prayer that an understanding of this topic will lead us to seek a closer personal fellowship with God each day. Now, last year, in our studies on the devotional life, we got into the question of the will one evening. We talked about it a little bit then. This time, during this series, we need to talk about it perhaps more than once or twice in order to see how it fits into the theme of sanctification by faith alone. The two main texts in the Bible on the subject of the will are Romans 7:18 and Philippians 2:12 and 13. And while you're turning to that, I'd like to make a confession. We entered into this study on sanctification by faith alone with a sense of certainty concerning 3/4 of the way down the road. And rather excited about the ultimate possible conclusions. One of the reasons for entering into it without all of the ultimate possible conclusions nailed down is to share the privilege and the opportunity to work through this, to study it, to put in the perspiration, all the rest of it together. If there are conclusions anywhere along the line that I am wrong on, I want to be willing to change And I hope the same applies for you. Someone said after last week, looks like we're beginning to, is this good? Shouldn't we be able to get into something heavy and dialogue on it and twist our brains out of shape on our knees before God's Word to find the answers? Do we always have to have all the answers dished to us? Can we sweat through this thing together? Is that fair enough? That's what I'm inviting you to do. And if nothing else happens but that we are sent to our knees to study and search and hammer it out for ourselves, being led by God's Spirit, then it's worthwhile. In spite of the fact that some people are going to say, division. And maybe one of these nights we'll have to get out to Hiram Edson's barn and spend 3 days in the hay on our knees. All right? Some of you might be willing to do that. But it's overdue that we spent as much time hammering out some of the basics as we did hammering out our church doctrines in the last century in Hiram Edson's barn. Isn't it? And I hope that by now you are aware, painfully aware, that we have no theology on sanctification yet. No clear theology on sanctification. So far, it's been everyone on his own. Find it by accident. All right, Romans 7:18. You know the phrase? Paul is talking. Let's not get bogged down about who he's talking about, himself, before or after, or the sinner. The frustration is very obvious. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. Now, someone earlier brought up this point. It's the point in Romans 7, verse 22, where he says, I delight in the law of God after the inward man. And they said, doesn't this show that Paul is inwardly, he's on the right track, but outwardly he's failing? You know, part of our premise so far has been that if we're right on the inside, we will be right on the outside. Now that was Jesus' premise, wasn't it? He says in Matthew 23, make clean first the inside of the cup. And what is his thought there? The outside will be clean. Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. Again and again we can nail down this Bible principle that if we're right on the inside, we're going to be right on the outside. So it looks like a discrepancy here. Paul says, I delight in the law of God after the inward man. I'd like to suggest that if he's having frustration trying to perform, that this delighting in the law of God after the inward man would apparently be an intellectual understanding of the law of God as being right and correct, but not yet a surrender of the inward man to God to let God control and take over it. You follow it all? It would be an intellectual assent to the rightness of the law of God, but no vital relationship yet as suggested in Romans 8. All right, what's the frustration then? To will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. Now turn to Philippians 2:13. Question here, could the will also mean here that you really want to do what's right, but you don't have the power to do it? Be in the realm of intellectual assent again, wouldn't it? Because if I have done further than intellectual assent, then the power would come with it to do it. You're jumping the gun. You're supposed to wait till the last 15 minutes. Philippians 2:12. Wherefore, my beloved, as ye have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. There is something to do. Don't anyone ever go out of here and say that we are saying there's nothing to do. There is something to do. And it requires every ounce of energy and willpower and backbone and self-discipline that you possess. It is to seek to know God. Okay? And if you'll do that, verse 13, then it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of His good pleasure. Both to will and to do. Both to will and to do. Now, notice the words are different in Romans 7:18. To will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. I'd like to suggest that the performing corresponds to the doing in Philippians. So in Romans 7, he's saying, to will, but how to do, I find not. In Philippians, he discovers, as he did in Romans 8, that it is God's purpose to both will and do within us. He does both of them. If we will and do to let Him. We've noticed earlier that God's intent is to control us. And if He doesn't control us, the devil will, and that there are no other alternatives. Therefore, the only control we have is to decide which one's going to control us. And this is where our willing and doing comes in, toward a relationship of utter dependence to be entered into by a proud being, and strong people find this very hard to do, so that He will then control and take over and will and do within us. Now, of course, I think we've noticed earlier that there are three ways of reading this one in Philippians 2. We can read it, for it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do, or it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do, or it is God that worketh in you, both of you to will and to do. You recall this earlier as we started the series. And that's why we go into the subject of the will tonight and next week and maybe the week after. Let's first of all get a definition for will. Will, even according to Webster, is nothing more than volition or the power of choice. Therefore, your will is your power to choose. You can also read it in the book, Volume 5, page 513. The will is the deciding power. And if you want to read a little homework before next week, read 3 references in the Spirit of Prophecy writings. One of them starts on page 513 of Volume 5. The other one is page 47 in Steps to Christ. And the third one is starting on page 60 in the book Mount of Blessing, about cutting off your right hand or your right eye. All of these on the will. Steps to Christ, page 47, says the will is the power of decision or of choice. Now, I would like to just make a summit distinction between will and willpower. When I first began to read this, I liked the first part because it described my condition completely. I didn't like it at the same time because of my condition. Perhaps you read it. Steps to Christ, page 47. Many are inquiring, how am I to make the surrender of myself to God? You desire to give yourself to Him, but you are weak in moral power, in slavery to doubt, and controlled by the habits of your life of sin. Your promises and resolutions are like ropes of sand. You cannot control your thoughts, your impulses, your affections. The knowledge of your broken promises and forfeited pledges weakens your confidence in your own sincerity and causes you to feel that God cannot accept you. But you need not despair. And I said, good news. What's the answer? And it gives me the answer in the next line. What you need to understand is the true force of the will. And I said, that's my problem. I don't have enough will. I better work on my will because my will isn't forceful enough. So I began trying to develop more force to my will. At that time, I thought that my will was my willpower, my backbone, my self-discipline. So I began forcing myself to do things I didn't like to do. I didn't find it easy to do. I was developing more force to my will. Have you ever been in this? Make yourself get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Just see if you can do it. Force yourself to jog 10 miles without stopping, really using your will. Force yourself to drink 16 glasses of water. Forcing yourself to stay out of the cookie jar. Developing more force to your will. If religion was a thing that backbone could buy, then the strong would live and the weak would die. But we all have a title to a mansion on high. Right here, I'd like to suggest something else. That the strong-willed person who has lots of self-discipline and grit and determination, who can set his mind to something and accomplish it, may not even be qualified to study this subject or talk about it until he has been broken. You read me at all? Until he has been broken. It is the strong person who has been able to do fine, thank you, by grit and determination, who gets uptight over this subject because it becomes a threat to his security when he finds out that he cannot count on his good self-discipline to take him through. That is, the strong person who hasn't been broken yet. And Jesus made it very clear that it is necessary to fall on the rock and be broken, on the part of both the weak and the strong. Didn't he? And he said, if we do not know what it means, whether we're weak or strong, to fall on the rock and be broken and discover that we can't do it, that someday the rock is going to fall on us and do what with us? Do you recall? Grind us to powder. Then I discovered it isn't talking about willpower and in terms of backbone at all. And that's why I suggest a distinction between will and willpower. Now, when we use the term willpower, we usually are using the term to be synonymous with backbone, grit, self-discipline. But most of us would not, in common usage, equate the power of choice with grit, backbone, and self-discipline. So, again this evening, as we did a year ago, I'd like to suggest that the will is the power to choose. Willpower is your power to do what you've chosen. Will, power to choose. Willpower, power to do. Then when Paul says in Romans 7:18, to will is present with me, but how to perform or how to do that which is good I find not, you can see again a distinction here. In Philippians 2, when he says that God works in us both to will and to do, we again see a distinction between the two. Now, you may choose to challenge the distinction between these two. That's all right. You may come up with something better. All right? Now, we have it very clear that the importance of the will is significant. And this is one reason why some of us, in spite of the frustration, have refused to scrap the study. We keep coming back to statements like these. Volume 5, 513. Pure religion has to do with the will. The one we've already read, Steps to Christ 47, what you need to understand is the true force of the will. Volume 5, page 513 again, you will be in constant danger until you understand the true force of the will. And Counsels on Health, page 440, through the right exercise of the will, an entire change may be made in your life. So there is a right use and a wrong use of your will, or your power of choice. Now right here, I'd like to suggest that the wrong use of the will is using your power of choice toward trying to produce righteousness, equated with Paul's statement in Romans 7:18, how to perform that which is good, I find not. You notice where his will is directed? Toward trying to produce that which is good. How to perform that which is good, I find not. He was bogged down in the wrong use of his will. All right? The right use of the will is to use your power of choice toward the faith relationship in Jesus. Volume 5, page 513. If you will fight the fight of faith with all your willpower, you will conquer. Now let me ask you something. If I'm using all of my willpower to fight the fight of faith, how much willpower does that leave over on anything else? Does this make sense at all? If the fight of faith, in its very essence, is the effort necessary to come into a relationship of dependence and trust with God, and I'm using all of my willpower to fight that fight, how much willpower does that leave to fight sin or anything else? None. Before we're finished with this series, I'd like to give you at least 10 major reasons why genuine obedience in the Christian life has to be natural. And this is going to be one of them in our summary. You're using all of your willpower toward the one direction. The one direction. All right, when we talk about the will, we're talking about surrender, because surrender is of the will. And here's where we continue our little Steps to Christ statement. After the frustrating description, it then says, what you need to understand is the true force of the will. All right? When you continue this carefully, you find that the very next sentence defines the will in context. It says, this is the governing power in the nature of man and woman. The power of decision or of choice. There's your context definition. So, substitute power of choice from now on every point where we discover the word will used. Everything depends on the right action of the will. Or, everything depends on the right action of what? Your power of choice. The power of choice God has given to men and women. It is theirs to exercise. You cannot change your heart. Have you discovered that? You cannot of yourself give to God its affections. Have you discovered that? But you can choose to serve Him. Choose to serve Him. Notice, it isn't choosing what to do or what not to do. It is choosing whom to serve. Now, that very word suggests something else. When we choose to serve someone, we become His servants. And He becomes our master. I like kindergarten, I know, but I want all the help I can get here. He becomes our master. We become His servants. A servant is under the control of the master. This again supports our earlier thought that God's purpose is to, by our choice, control us. Master to servant. All right? And the very next sentence is Fantastic. You can give him your will. Or you can give him your what? Power of choice. And right there is where many people get nervous. They say, don't tell me that. That takes away from the dignity of man and women being born in the image of God. We never surrender our power of choice. No, that's true in a sense. We never surrender our power of choice to give him our power of choice. There is a sense in which our power of choice is never surrendered. It is in the sense of surrendering to him our power of choice. Are you with us still? Only it's back again to the same category. We're going to be controlled by either God or the devil. And the only control we have over it is which one's going to control us. But we're still in control of who's going to control us. This is in the same ballpark again, right? You can give him your will. And notice the very next result. He will then work in you to will and to do according to his good pleasure. Now, what does that really say concerning Philippians 2:12 and 13? For it is God that worketh in you, both to will and to do, doesn't it? That's what this is saying. He will then work in you to will and to do according to his good pleasure. Thus your whole nature will be brought under the control of the Spirit of Christ. Your affections will be centered upon him. Your thoughts will be in harmony with him. To the right exercise of the will, or your power of choice, an entire change may be made in your life. By yielding up your will to Christ, or by yielding up your what? I only heard two people say it. Now please don't say this is a human theory tonight. I'm reading it out of a book. Someone else said it. I didn't. By yielding up your power of choice to Christ, you ally yourself with the power that is above all principalities and powers. You will have strength from above to hold you steadfast. And thus through constant surrender, if it's going to be constant surrender, then it's going to be constant surrender. Don't someone come along now and bring us this quote from Mount of Blessing, which says that he gives us our will back again for us to use as we will. We'll notice how that fits in a moment. But thus, through constant surrender to God, you will be enabled to live the new life, even the life of faith. There is a sense in which our leaving our will in God's control is continuous and unbroken. Constant surrender. Otherwise, it'd be surrender, get it back, and start. Like some people said, you mean, it sort of sounds like, at first glance, that our will is something we can detach, like an entity. We can send it to the cleaners. And the heavenly cleaners cleans it up, and then sends it back to us, and now we can use it in the right way. No. Let's read the other one in Mount of Blessing. Just to be fair, page 97, God does not design that our will should be destroyed, for it is only through its exercise that we can accomplish what he would have us do. Our will is to be yielded to him, that we may receive it again, purified and refined, and so linked in sympathy with the divine, that he can pour through us the tides of his love and power. To put it in short, I'd like to take this position, that when we surrender our power of choice to him, he gives it back to us, but when it comes back to us, it comes with him in control of it. Do you read this at all? When our will comes back, it comes with him in control. Therefore, you have a constant state of surrender existing. And maybe one of the best descriptions of this is in the book Christ Object Lessons, page 312. When we submit ourselves to Christ, the heart is united with his heart, the will is merged in his will, The mind becomes one with His mind. The thoughts are brought into captivity to Him. We live His life. This is what it means to be clothed with the garments of His righteousness. I want to ask you one more question that is the same one we've been asking again and again. Please, I want to go through that statement once more, and you ask the question of yourself. Would I have to try hard to do what's right? Would I have to try hard to be good? Now, are you ready? When we submit ourselves to Christ, the heart is united with His heart. The will is merged in His will. The mind becomes one with His mind. The thoughts are brought into captivity to Him. We live His life. Would we have to try hard to do it? Would we have to try hard to be good? Try hard to do what's right? Why may I go so far as to take the same position again we've been taking? We would have to try hard not to if that was the case. But if that was the case, who would want to? Try hard not to. This is what it means to be clothed with the garments of His righteousness in the sanctification sense again, please. And our growth in the Christian life is the growth in the constancy of this very thing. I noticed last week, really, one of the big snags that we've hit so far in our study is that there are some who are not sure at all of this premise, that all of the ultimate victory that we can have is available now. This is where we missed it. Some of us are not together on that point, and this is a major point. A major point. Perhaps we'll have to run that by again, see how many are confused or have different opinion on that before we're through with our series. But the whole thing is that this condition exists so long as. Read one more and then we have to be finished for tonight, I guess. This is printed in the book Review and Herald 12/16/02. Those who realize their weakness trust in a power higher than self. May we go so far as to reverse that. The strong people who don't realize their weakness do not need to trust in a power higher than themselves. But those who realize their weakness trust in a power higher than self. And while they look to God, Satan has no power over them. Notice the condition. While they look to God, Satan has no power over them. But those who trust in self are easily defeated. Those who trust in self are easily defeated. That's Christ 64. As we come to distrust our own power, let us trust the power of our Redeemer.
You have been listening to another special American Christian Ministries presentation. This recording has been digitally reprocessed from the original audio cassette or reel-to-reel in order to make this CD available. The audio quality was improved as much as possible. International copyright, American Christian Ministries. All rights reserved. To order a copy of this or other presentations, or for a free catalog, please call toll-free 800-233-4450. International calls dial 717-652-7000. You may also order from our secure website at www.americanchristianministries.org. There you will discover the largest selection of authentic Adventist preaching available. American Christian Ministries is not a one-man band. It is an orchestra of outstanding speakers who are all on the same theological page. If American Christian Ministries has been a blessing to you, why not take a moment just now and send us a note or an email with your testimony? We'll share it with our speakers and volunteer workers to encourage them. Your prayers and continued financial support are very important to ensure the continuation of this ministry as we help prepare America and the world to meet Jesus Christ. He's coming soon.